欢迎大家来参加我们的午间中文。It's a read-aloud session about Chinese language, art, literature, history, geography. I would have to ask my host, my technology support, to make sure while we have the mute function for the participants, so that we will have an uninterrupted first part. But well, as I mentioned, well, it's a series that covers Chinese language and many cultural aspects. My name is Shen Zhan. I'm the head of the School of Chinese Studies at China Institute. It's really great to have everyone here. So we have a lot to cover. I'm super excited today, not only because I'm sharing one of my favorite poets for the read aloud part, but also I'm excited and honored to have a special guest today, whom I will introduce later. For new friends, our format is for the first part, we will do a read aloud session together of a poem selected in Chinese. And then the second part, I will introduce our guest speaker who will share his special expertise and knowledge of one of some related, relevant part of the cultural content related to the poem. And the third part, we will have a breakout session into 2 rooms. So please, in the chat room, you can put A for beginners. That's from 0 background of Chinese language to maybe a few months learning Chinese. And B for everything else. It's not a perfect system, but well, we will be able to separate into a smaller group so that we can practice together in the breakout session. So as I mentioned, we will record the session except for the breakout session and make it available on our YouTube channel for future access. You can decide whether you want to keep your camera on. So without further ado, please give me a few seconds to share my screen and we will start today's read aloud time. Just 1 second. All right. So today we are reading 水调歌头, 水调歌头 by Su Shi. The translation I want to point out is by Stephen Owen. His anthology of Chinese literature is one of the most comprehensive collections of Chinese classical literature from antiquity to 1911. So if you are interested in Chinese classical poem and also interested in the good, excellent English translation, this is the book that you may want to look into. I can still hear some background, so for participants,
Shenzhen, you are muted now. You are muted now, so we can't hear you.
Okay, now you can hear me. Thank you, Linda. Thank you. Yeah. So Su Shi is an important figure in Chinese literary history. Of course, everybody we introduce in this series is important, but he is especially important in the Ci tradition. We will get a taste of his style from today's reading. And you can see in this painting, Shi Sheng, who's from Qing Dynasty, 14th century, 300 years after Su Shi's time. His portrait of Su Shi is dressed in a civil style. On the left is Shi Sheng's calligraphy, showing respect to Su Shi, or in his title, it's Su Dongpo. Su Dongpo. I have to mention that in Chinese tradition, Su Shi is also having a literary name as 东坡居士. It's like a resident of a hut in Dongpo. Dong means east, Po means hill. So this kind of literary name that given oftentimes by the poet, him or herself, is often used to address the poet himself after, especially among the peers or by admirers in generations later. This is a tradition that shared among the Chinese literatis. You can see on his shoulder, there is a giant stamp that's by the Emperor Qianlong in 18th century. We know in history that Qianlong, the emperor, is a huge arts and culture patron and also a notorious stamper. Basically, he stamped anything that he collected. I also want to share just quickly, this painting is actually only part of a larger painting. We don't actually have a real, just 1 second, we don't have a real portrait of Su Dongpo. Of course, you can see this is the portion that we just saw, but well, in this scroll, it's part of a longer scroll that includes Su Dongpo's own calligraphy. This is the calligraphy by Su Dongpo himself, a letter that he wrote. And this piece is currently on display in the Forbidden City in Palace Museum as part of a celebration of its 600th anniversary, which, as we know, is also the home of Qianlong Emperor. So it's sort of a nice way to connect the dots. I also want to just give a very brief mention of the time Su Dongpo or Su Shi was born into. We may know that Song Dynasty, that's Su Shi's, that's the empire that Su Shi lived through. It was a militarily weak empire. By 1126, the Song Empire had to give up its northern territory to the Mongols. So we can see this is the map of the northern Song territory. The lighter orange part is we call that southern Song. So Song Dynasty is known to be split into two parts: Bei Song, northern Song, and Nan Song, southern, in the year of 1126. Well, Su Shi didn't have to witness the fall of the empire, but during his time, political reforms were called for to address the fiscal problem of the empire and improve the morale of the populace, which I find it sounds especially familiar for today's world. Being politically conservative, Su Shi was against the reform and was in fact pushed aside and removed from the capital, expelled to various regions. His political career never really had a comeback. However, this didn't prevent him from, or perhaps even contributed to his accomplishments as a poet and artist. Despite Song Dynasty's weakness in military and political power, cities under the Song Empire truly developed a sense of thriving urban cultures. I find it's important to pay attention to that, as that also adds the background to read Su Shi's poem. As you can see from this painting along the river during the Qingming festivals by Zhang Zeduan, who's a contemporary artist of Su Shi's time. It's only part of the much larger painting, but you can see markets, entertainment districts, artisan quarters, booksellers, parks, vendors, shops, theaters, many other things that, well, we can see from the scroll. Everything we enjoy in today's city life, like New York or other cities where you are, you would find in cities during Song Dynasty. So we can get a very brief peek from this painting by Zhang Zeduan. With that background, let's get to 水调歌头. So I want to give a full picture at the beginning. 水调歌头, there are, I would say, 3 parts. The part we are seeing right now is a brief introduction. And the first part of the poem, in Chinese we call 上阙. 上阙. And the second part, 下阙. 下阙. So this is particularly a 词, the genre of the poem. Now we call 词 as lyrics. It is originally lyrics written according to fixed tunes, which define the length of each line, how to rhyme, etc. So 水调歌头 is in fact not the title of the poem itself, but the name of the tune. Thus, the translation of the title is not, it is actually 2 song for the river tune, as the following is the lyrics according to 水调歌头 tune. So for the first time, I want to make a little change. I would invite you to listen to my reading first, and please pay attention to the pronunciation to see if you can recognize some of the words or characters in my reading, and also pay attention to the English translation. We would not have a lot of time to go through the meanings of the words, but we have everything displayed from pinyin, the first line, to the characters, the Chinese written form, and the English translation. Hopefully that would get the meaning across effectively. So the first time, listen and we'll get to the meaning of the poem. Here we go. 秉承中秋，欢饮达旦，大醉，作此篇，兼怀子由。明月几时有？把酒问青天。不知天上宫阙，今夕是何年？我欲乘风归去，又恐琼楼玉宇，高处不胜寒。起舞弄清影，何似在人间？转朱阁，低绮户，照无眠。不应有恨，何事长向别时圆？人有悲欢离合，月有阴晴圆缺，此事古难全。但愿人长久，千里共婵娟。All right, so here now is your turn. I will read each line twice. The first time, I will pause after each character or a word. to allow time for everyone to follow. And the second time, I will read the entire line and pause. All right, here we go. 明月几时有把酒问 sorry 青天
天
明月几时有
明月
几时有？
把酒问青天
把酒
问青
青
天，
天，
不
不
知
知
知
天
天
上
上
宫
宫
雀
宫阙
今
今
夕
夕
是
和年
年
不知天上宫阙
不
不
知天上宫阙，
今夕是何年
今是何年？
我
我
欲
欲
乘风归
归
去
去，
我欲乘风归去
我欲乘风归去，
又恐
熊
楼欲雨又恐琼楼玉宇
又恐琼楼玉宇，
高处不胜寒高处不胜寒
高处不胜寒，
起舞弄听影起舞弄清影
弄清影，
自在人间何似在人间
何似在人间？
转
诸
葛转朱阁低起户低起户照无眠照无眠不应
应
应
有
有
恨，
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 不应有恨，
不
不应有恨，
和
和
是
是
常
常
将
将
别
别
时圆
人
和是常向别时圆，
是常向别时圆，
人
人
有
有
悲
悲
欢
欢
离
离
合，
和，
人有悲欢离合，
人有悲欢离合，
和
月
月
有
有
阴
阴
晴
香
圆
人
缺
缺
月有阴晴圆缺，
月有阴晴圆缺，
此
子
是古
古
难
难
全，
全，
此事古难全，
此事古难全，
但
但
愿
愿
人
人
长
长
久，
久，
但愿人长久，
但愿人长久，
千
千
里
里
共
共
婵娟，
婵
千里共婵娟。
千里共婵娟。
很好, thank you. So for those who know about Chinese classical poems, you probably know there are many poems about the moon. This line, 但愿人长久，千里共婵娟, is perhaps the best known. Mid-Autumn Festival was just 2 weeks ago. So I find, well, this poem perhaps would resonate with the season, some of the political stories that Su Shi went through, and also Changjuan. I want to mention Changjuan is a name, it is said, according to stories or historical legends, the name of a female attendant to Qu Yuan, the first known Chinese poet in literary history from 300 BC. So that's the sort of the background story or information about the name. It's a metaphorical name for the moon. For hundreds of years, her name represents beautiful, elegant women, as well as the moon, which of course is the feminine symbol. So I want to stop here because I know my guest has a time limit. We can do a little bit more reading after his introduction, but now please allow me to have the pleasure to introduce my special guest, Mr. Zhao Yong.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah, I just want to quickly say that, well, first of all, thank you to join today's program. And
It's a pleasure.
Mr. Zhao is a graduate from Peking University, studied environmental science at Yale University, and the mastermind, co-founder, and CEO of Junzi Kitchen, serving innovative Chinese food to New York and New Jersey. Junzi Kitchen has several locations across the city and New Jersey. So as well, we read Su Shi's poem today. We know he's a poet, he's a calligrapher, he's a great artist in brush painting, in fact, and a political figure. And he's also known in Chinese culture as a foodie. So that's the reason we are honored to have Mr. Zhao here today to share his stories about literati figures and Chinese food. So, Mr. Zhao, it's all yours now.
Shall we have the presentation shared on the screen?
Sure. Yeah, I will do that. Just a second.
Hi everyone, my name is Yong. I was born in northern China and did my college in Beijing, and then went to Yale and started my food venture from there. Myself, also I wrote poetry, but it's in the modern form. So it's a pleasure to share something about the older generation of literati, the foodies. So I go to this special angle about the very influential figures from the literati class. About Chinese food. So obviously, Su Dongpo is one of the most influential figures to today's Chinese food cultures in the historical context. So I just start with him, and then we'll also introduce another two important person. So I won't get too deep on this because I don't have time, but definitely it's a great topic. You can look more into this. So let's get started. Please go to page 2. First about the literati social class, but in the Confucian context, literati is kind of embodiment of the political power. So they work together with the emperor to govern the society. In the meantime, they're kind of embodiment of the virtues, the high virtues of their moral ground, but also the lifestyles. So they're kind of in this gentleman class. So they call the the scholar gentleman, or they call actually Junzi in the historical context. So the name we're using in our restaurant is basically come from this kind of histories. So usually they're highly educated. They are political leaders, but not necessarily always in power. But they're very important social leader as well, and they're always kind of a master of literature, poetry, painting, or some like associate kind of skills. So this picture is basically show this kind of lifestyle, bunch of bunch of middle-aged dudes basically, and their lifestyle, they're kind of master of land or master of kind of social influences. For next pages, please. So Su Shi, he's very important in terms of literature and poetry. Also a lot of other things too. So, but for this dude, he is one of the most optimistic guy. But because he's kind of have this kind of nature of being such optimistic and also sometimes even naive, so his political career is not that smooth. So here, I think those food creation he being through is kind of a combination of his characters of being the very optimistic guy, but also this kind of life experience of him being exiled to different places because of that kind of naiveness of him. So let's start by, well, the picture is always like that, but it not necessarily be the true picture of him. It's not their photos or anything, but to give a pure kind of imagination about who he is. Let's go next kind of slide. So on the right hand is about his life map, so which means he was born on the Sichuan province in the 1080. So at that moment there are no Sichuan food like we know today. The chili pepper is not there, so there's a different type of Sichuan food. So he was born there, and then he just went out of the north through Dienge into Kaifeng, which is the political center of the of China at that moment of Song Dynasty. And then he was very successful with his brothers and uncles, I think, as kind of those kind of genius from Sichuan, and their literature being well accepted. So then he's been through the 3 times of the exile and going back to power. So then, because of this one political incident of poetries, then he was basically almost get executed. So then he was exiled to Hubei, so which is on the pink circle of this. At that moment, Hubei still today is kind of one of probably most populated area in China, but at that moment still considered as one of the kind of far away area, in the middle of nowhere kind of area. Almost feels like a Middle West. A lot of Chinese at that moment. So he was sent there first that time, and he was a bit struggling with all these failures of being the political figure sent out. The first kind of a setback, but then he basically found porks. So in Hubei at that moment, is more like the pork is good, also cheap, because the rich people don't want it, but also the poor people don't have enough firewood to really cook it. So he's like, oh, interesting. So he started really figure out how to do this kind of pork stuff. So basically he invented like bamboo with the pork, started really developed a recipe around the pork. And then this dongpo rou is developed, started from that area, but not fully developed in this form of this kind of fatty pork belly yet. So later, in the second period of time, he was fully finalized these recipes. But interesting thing is his name Dongpo is also start from that area. So in the Huangzhou period, in the Hubei, which is very near to capital of Hubei province right now. So his residence is called the farm is called the Dongpo place. So that's where he restarted his identity at that moment. So I mean, there's an old saying in the Chinese poetry that so the great literature hates good luck of the creators. So which means whenever there's the writers have a bad luck or something, his emotion will really get stirred and he start writing really good pieces, like such Li Bai, Du Fu, all these famous artists. They started to create the best stuff when he was in the struggle. So the same thing happened to Su Shi as well. So during those times, he really kind of get into, okay, life sucks. What I do, right? He kind of being optimistic about, okay, I can find some awesome food, and he can write awesome poetries, and then he's really getting famous for their literatures. So after the short period of time of 6 years, he was kind of invited back to the capital, and then he was sent as governor to the Hangzhou area, which is on the right side of this map. In the Hangzhou area, still he do a lot of engineering that moment, like in the West Lake Xihu, one of the most beautiful places in China. So he has a lot of projects still there, being people's like the hottest tourist point of there, like Sudi, one of the levees that he built for the lakes. But at that moment, there are not too many kind of dishes he left over. One of Dongpo rou he kind of finalized into this form. So one of the most famous Chinese restaurant chain in China called the Meizhou Dongpo is basically from kind of the iconic dishes like this. So let's go next one. So in the second exile him, basically a few years later, so he was sent to all the way south, called Huizhou. It's kind of Guangdong area. So at the moment, that's like Alaska of China. So it's always in the middle of nowhere, way more than Hubei. But surprisingly, he actually find, wow, this is actually awesome here because there's so much like food and fruits, because in the climate there, tropical kind of zones, that actually a lot of fruits grow there. So the locals really eat a lot of lambs, but because his identity as being almost like criminals, sent to the faraway lands. So he was not supposed to eat like the best part of the lamb. And then he figured out, okay, what do I do? But I still want the lamb. So he got a bunch of bones and spines, and he started kind of look into the spines, the little meats, scrap meats in between the spines, and also the marrows in the spines feel it's very, very, very delicious. He started getting feelings, oh, this like tastes like shrimp, tastes like crab. So he brought his brothers about this kind of way of eating and then put in the stools. And it's like, well, this way of eating is awesome. But the only thing is, all the dogs around me is unhappy because I eat at the bones. They have their things. But also he wrote that like one of the poetries very famous for, if I can eat like 日啖荔枝300颗，不妨常作岭南人, which means if you can eat 300 lychees every day, I don't worry about being like a long-term resident around here. I want to be here. That's so awesome. So basically about that. So only after 2 years of this period, he was further sent to the Hainan area, which is next slide. So that means this is a final exile of him, sent to Hainan area, because Hainan is like, well, it's not Alaska, but also almost like Siberians, like go to that far away lands further. So that's called the Leizhou, right? So that's really, really far away. And then he's like, well, what I do? But I find oysters. He wrote to his son about these oysters, like, don't let all these guys in this Kaifeng, in this capital, know this, because they may come to here and to really, you know, get a lot of the oyster from me. So, but it's kind of also it's a kind of being a little bit sarcastic about it, because no one want to go there at the moment. So then it almost become his kind of final years, because he's died 1101. This he was there until the last 5 years there. So when he started to kind of final years of him, he started really talk about what his reflection about his life. So he wrote another poetry about what he think. So he think that moment he's like, my heart is like the ash of a ooze. My body is like the boat with no anchors. But if you ask me what my accomplishment is, I think it's about Huangzhou, Huizhou, and Zhengzhou, which is also Leizhou. So it's about that 3 exile places he was been to. He think that's the most accomplished place in the areas he was with at that moment. So that's about like Su Shi's like a few creations, but there's way more dishes he's talking about, such as fishes, soups. If you look for him, there's a lot of more introduction, especially in the Chinese world, but not necessarily all the kind of dishes accurate being created by him, because he's so famous, and there's a lot of dishes trying to become famous and trying to use his name as become the origin story of the dishes. So some dishes real, some dishes not real, but they're all very good though. So that's him, about his life of the food creations. There's not 2 important figures I want to introduce before I go. Let's go next slide. So Li Yu is another figure. So Li Yu is we call it drama king. So it's very literally, the drama king means he actually the first like established this kind of critique system of dramas. Like in Chinese dramas, like Beijing opera, all the stuff is not well developed until probably the Ming, later Ming dynasty or Qing dynasty. So he's born in the Ming dynasty, but at the moment it's probably last emperor of the Ming dynasty. And then he wants to go to the kind of traditional way of going to political power, going to kind of exam all that stuff. But the emperor is collapsing right now. So he's not actually getting to those positions. So which means he spent a lot of his time trying to just become more like just literati in the society kind of social leader kind of area. So he's a very good playwright, very good novelist, also like first professional publisher of his work. So really care about intellectual properties, trying to protect those things. That's kind of his job. You know, he's first doing those things, but also he's first professional writer, which means he write for just write for his life. See, his income from his writing. Also, is presumed author of 肉蒲团, one of the most influential erotic literature in China as well. He's a kind of very interesting guy. And also, when he's writing, and he started really kind of getting everything together, called the 闲情偶记, which means the enjoyment of leisure time, just random things he pick up. But he in that kind of volume of books series, he talked a lot about drama, about critics, about those ways of theory about drama stuff. But also one of the volumes to talk about food. So that's why it kind of is important to look at his food philosophy. Is kind of, he's very early vegetarian in China, because in China the vegetarian history is like nobody really eat pure vegetarian unless you're monks. By that moment, he was the one who really promoted, I think, the meat. The raw meat is less than the cooked meat, and cooked meat is no better than the vegetables. Vegetable is always better. So you really want to promote the kind of don't kill, you know, eat more vegetable kind of lifestyle. So Yuan Mei, the next slide, is not a very important figure, because he's the kind of one who's famous for those books, the recipe books he created. He's been born in the Qing dynasty, in master literature and poetry, and he got all the government job. But when it's 38 years old, he's like, man, this job too hard. I don't want to work for Qing dynasty. I want to just chill. You know, he's famous, so which means a lot of people will, even he's quitting his job as a governor or a mayor, but a lot of people asking, oh, you should come to, you know, write some signage for me. So I give you a good money for that because you're famous. So he's doing well. He's getting a lot of money, and he has to help a lot of people. He eats a lot of food. So he can be kind of foodies. And in his older years, he's like, man, I eat so much different kind of awesome food. How about I just, you know, write them down, put everybody to understand it. So he'll have 14 chapters of these kind of different kind of food and 26 dishes. So he worked with another, like not kind of professional but amateur kind of chef, but worked together with all these recipes. So like one of the dishes actually I put here is imitation crab. It's kind of, it's not particular vegetarian food, but it's more like a imitation crab meat with fish. This is a very interesting guy. So there's actually a real copy of his original print in the Yale libraries. Well, sometimes find these libraries books. So very interesting kind of recipes. Still, a lot of people study today. So I think that's my time. I need to have a phone calls, but thank you very much. I just want to, I think it's the opportunity to share some of these interesting foodies. Go look them up. It's a very awesome stories.
Thank you, Yong. Well, I know you have to go. I just want to give this opportunity. Anybody has any question? I can only take one before Yong has to go away to have a phone
Sorry,
call.
I got to pick the call now.
Oh, okay. Then we don't have the.
Yeah.
But thank you so much. Yeah. Well, I do want to encourage everyone. Well, go check out the Junzi Kitchen. Well, you probably, well, I truly feel Yong is the embodiment of the contemporary Junzi and bringing the understanding of culture, history, literature, and everything into the food and the kitchen he loves. So do check it out. So now it's the time that we will go into a breakout session. It takes a little bit longer for the first two parts, so we probably only have a few minutes to practice together. I would ask my colleague Zhiren to start the breakout session, and please click accept so that we will go into a smaller group, and you can unmute yourself and we will practice the poem together.